Damiano, welcome on Blockchain Rock. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so thank you, Omri, for this chance and opportunity to have this quick chat with you and
It's a pleasure.
Basically my experience. I'm an Italian qualified lawyer. I started my career basically kind of 8 years ago.
Okay.
Having the chance to work for 1 year as an intern in the Bank of Italy, the Central Bank of Italy, and that's where everything started and becoming fascinating about this beautiful world of financial and banking regulation. I moved then to Switzerland for almost 1 year, working for a company setting up hedge funds within across Europe and Switzerland, and it was a very interesting, opportunity to understand how the legal market work in a third country compared to Europe, which has developed very strong banking and financial system.
So I have a question. Sorry if I stop you right now. I have a question about what's the interplay, because of course, as you mentioned, Switzerland is outside of the European Union with respect to financial regulation. So I wanted to ask you, what are the main differences? Because I know that although it's a third country, it has developed a regulatory system which is capable of interfacing itself in the day-to-day with Europe, like quite in a quite of an agile manner. So you don't have to go through, some hoops, and it's quite, I think Switzerland has developed quite a good regulatory system to be able to converse with the European one. So what was your experience with that?
Thinking about 2012, 2013, the strongest, the strongest gun in the end of the Swiss regulator was the bank secret. So basically, the chance to, coming from Milano with some money, put that money in the Swiss bank, and without that strong AML checks that we used to have in Italy. So. But this doesn't mean that I'm criticizing the Swiss regulation and the Swiss system.
Yeah, I know. In 2000, also because right now that's not the case anymore, right?
That's not the case, and that's the important thing is that even if they switched from a system based on the secret and on less, stronger control compared to the IML of Europe, even though they changed their view now and they have a full compliance with the bank without the bank secret, is the fact that they developed, they still attract capitals and investors due to the fact that the Swiss regulator is very flexible, and the approach of the Swiss regulator is able to understand, the new things that are coming in the financial market. So I'm thinking about the regulation they have regarding the ICO or the crypto world.
And what's the regulation? Because I know, of course, also Malta was coming up with its own regulation, and like a jurisdiction like Gibraltar, where I'm based, they're quite agile. They're capable of being quick and responsive when it comes to new technological trends and to covering them with regulations. So from what I understand, Malta has not issued yet any license. Because although they had the plan to develop the regulatory system, but I might be wrong. I'm not 100% sure about that. From what I understand, they have not released any license. What's the regulation in Switzerland when it comes to ICO? Are you versed with that, or?
Let's say that the Swiss authority, as far as I know, has issued some, guideline or statement. And they were basically, I believe, the first regulator across Europe trying to qualify the type of cryptocurrency within the market. So, as I was saying, it's compared to Malta approach, for instance. I believe that the Swiss approach is more, based on the soft regulation rather than enacting laws
I see.
as Malta did. So
Yeah.
it's basically two different approach, a stronger one, the Maltese one, let's say, and let's say the soft one, which is not based on proper,
Yeah.
let's say, rules, but more on the advice and statement of the Swiss regulator, the FINMA.
I see, because I think like one fact that is quite curious, in my opinion, is that I believe both Malta and but particularly Swiss, they focused on regulating cryptocurrencies and ICOs and STO rather than the blockchain technology. So like it's interesting to see how different regulators across um, the world, but particularly in Europe, have taken different approaches, and of course that attracts different players. For example, in Gibraltar, we attract a lot of blockchain-based businesses. Also, there have been also a few ICOs and STOs, but of course now with ICOs have quieted down a little bit, although there is a little bit of a raise again. But what's interesting is that on the other end, if you look at Switzerland, for example, they attracted someone like Project Libra, all of those, which revolve more around the token itself rather than necessarily on the blockchain system. I see. And then from Switzerland, what did you do? Where did you move?
Then
Because
I
you said
moved
that you've
back.
been working.
Yes, I moved back to Milan, and let's say after that 1 year period, and start working as a lawyer. Basically, first as an house counsel for a big bank, and then moved into the private practice, working for law firms. In the regulation department of law firms. And then we met a couple of years ago in London because I decided to improve my knowledge of the financial regulation from the UK perspective. So I went to London to do this 1 year master, which was amazing. And that was, I think, the moment where we understood the importance of the developing market of fintech and blockchain technology. Yeah. Even though I used to wrote sometimes some articles even before 2016, but like at that time we couldn't believe how much the hype would have grown.
Yeah, because I know that afterwards, once we waved goodbye and you went back to Italy, you became very involved in the development of fintech within, in Italy. I know that you co-authored the first book on cryptocurrencies in Italy, and you've also received an award from the Italian Parliament for your involvement and contribution to this industry. So let's talk about Italy. You don't hear that often about the Italian involvement within fintech, but I know there have been, that Italy has been quite receptive. Although it has not yet implemented, I believe, any specific, and dedicated regulation. I think there are some guidelines, no, of some sort, or at least a take from Conso. What's the situation? Can you expand on that?
Okay. What we can say is basically we have a regulation of. We have a regulation that provides the definition of what is a virtual currency. We have a regulation for the crypto exchange, for the crypto trading platform.
Yeah.
And we have a regulation also for the wallet service providers. But it is not a complete regulation because it's only focused on the prevention of anti-money laundering. So basically, what Italy did on this side, we were, I believe, the first country within Europe starting regulating the cryptocurrency from the IML perspective, implementing the fifth anti-money laundering directive. But on the other hand, we don't actually have a regulation that clearly provides guidance on the qualification of, let's say, security token.
On the token, different categories.
So the Italian Regulation Authority, which is CONSOB, have issued a couple of months ago basically a consultation paper whereby they want to start to provide let's say a soft guidance issued by their regulation.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about this consultation paper is that they are trying to identify a special class of crypto activities. They call crypto activities, which will benefit from a special regulatory regime compared to the other financial product under MiFID regulation. So on one side, the approach was,
Okay. Even security. Sorry to interrupt you. Just to understand this point. So basically, even security, what now would be deemed as a security token offering, would be instead classed as a crypto activity and benefit from this framework, or it would continue to be subject to MiFID, and only ICO would be subject to this special crypto activity regime.
No, in concept approach, and this is the rationale behind this idea. They want to clearly identify what can be classified as a crypto activity,
Okay.
in order to avoid the risk that specific crypto activity will be qualified as securities pursuant to MiFID. So the direction of the regulator is to create, let's say, a special regime in order to avoid the possible sanction or stronger requisite. Stronger requisite for investment firms that wants to set up and trade with the cryptocurrency.
And that's a big problem, I think. Like, because nowadays with all of this, first of all, with the degree of compliance that exists in every industry, like if you are a startup that want to begin operating in the space, if you are classified as a financial instrument under MiFID, that brings the cost, like the costs are even higher, and it's I guess it's really, really tough to innovate in a space where just to buy in you need to have more than 100K just for the legal side. So I definitely understand. It could be. Go on.
And that's why, in my opinion, the market was a bit, let's say, smaller compared to other crypto markets in Europe.
Yeah.
Because we don't have, as far as today, we don't have a clear view of the regulator on the qualification of the product. So it's always a case-by-case analysis, which is very risky for the one who wants to invest in Italy. Because I
can imagine.
And also another interesting things about the Italian regulation is that our Consolidated Financial Act provides a broader definition of financial instruments compared to
MiFID. Compared to MiFID.
So we don't have a close, let's say close.
You don't have a closed list.
Closed list, but we have also the definition of financial products. We can be classified as other type of investment. So you can
that's really broad.
That's really broad, and that's really risky for the.
And how do you deal with it, like from a legal perspective? As a you're a lawyer, you're an Italian qualified lawyer working in financial services. How is the interplay between you and the regulator? Because my experience, of course, is limited to Gibraltar at the moment, and I know that smaller jurisdictions have a very responsive approach. That's the benefit of them, as compared to the bigger jurisdiction. The bigger jurisdiction sports other advantages that the smaller one cannot provide for, But how is the interplay? Because I assume then that there has to be like a lot of communication between you guys and the regulator, especially when you're approaching that gray area of other investments, and you would require the involvement of the regulator every single time. So it's almost like you're creating a common law, pass me the term, for the financial, correct? For the financial services, because you would then have to refer back to other guidelines that maybe were provided with respect to a specific instrument that resembles the one you're applying for right now. No? Is it something similar to that?
Yeah, it's something similar to that, yeah. And the problem is that, in my experience, it's always important, unless you are sure that that specific product are not classified as a financial instrument. If we have an utility token, for instance.
If it's clear.
Payment. But in my opinion, it's always important to keep in touch with the regulator and to be transparent, to be clear before giving an advice that would in case, in the worst scenario, require
Yeah.
counsel to knock at the door of the firm.
We tend from our end we approach the same. We employ your same approach. We, even if we believe that something falls outside of the scope, then we always advise our clients to open line of communication and communicate with the regulator. Just because one day the business model may evolve and may eventually fall within the regulatory scope of MiFID or other form of maybe payment processing activities. So yeah, it's always better to have. I think I agree with you. An open line of communication with them.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But because this also would help, I think, the regulator having a better understanding of
Yeah,
how the market is developing, and
exposure. Yeah,
therefore, maybe issue guidelines that can be more like, let's say, market friendly or
yeah,
business friendly.
yeah. I understand. And of course, well, right now Italy has been facing a very big problem with the spread of coronavirus. Um, how do you believe once this situation is over? And I know that there is no specific date, but let's say once this ends and politically the agenda can resume and the state can pursue its own goals, where do you see fintech heading toward in Italy? How do you think it being, what is the use in Italy aside from just being an alternative to fiat money, for example?
I think we need to rebuild the economy of Italy, basically, because now the situation is terrible. But I think we would have the chance using, for instance, the DLT technology. For instance, in one of the best, let's say, things that we can sell, which is food.
Yeah,
So in order to cut costs of the supply chain machine, let's say, governing all this process related to the food and to the certification of the quality of the food,
yeah.
we may use the blockchain as a solution for, to, to have this reprise in the economic
Yeah,
system of
what's really interesting actually that of course I'm an IP lawyer before being involved in financial services, and it's really interesting you say that because intellectual property are geographic, like they are geographically limited, right? So like it depends, in Europe, for example, there tends to be an harmonization, although it's not 100%, it doesn't um, it doesn't apply to all form of intellectual property. Okay, but there has been a big problem when it comes to, protecting some products. For example, Grana Padano, those that are, geographically denominated. Because, for example, if you go to a state like the US, right, or South Korea, I think they had a big problem there. They can just call it Grana Padano, and what can you tell them? The IP office in Italy or Europe, for all that matters, can't really enforce it. I remember there was one of the benefits of having the agreement with the US. I don't remember the name right now. What's the TTP? To the
yeah,
TTIP? Yeah, the TTIP,
the-
the transatlantic treaty. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. But the agreement between the US and Europe, which was of course terrible for Europe because it would have lowered the market standard with respect to so many products, from cosmetics to to other health and safety concern. One of the benefit, though, was the fact that there was supposed, from what I understand, to be a recognition to geographically denominate the products coming from Europe, so that they could have not used Grana Padano on a cheese from Mississippi. I don't know if Mississippi produces cheese, and I know that the same problem existed in South Korea, where they started using, I think, Grana Padano cheese on cheese that was produced there. So for the consumer, that's a benefit, and it also aid the use of blockchain within the food market. I think it has multiple benefits, like of course cutting costs, as you said. It protects the brands from the perspective of the producers. It protects the consumer as to what they purchase. Knowing that the quality knowing that the product they are purchasing is in fact bearing that mark legitimately. So yeah, it's really interesting.
yeah,
And
yeah.
what else apart from the food? Do you think that actually maybe crypto and blockchain, and especially if Italy was to regulate, the space, promptly after coronavirus. Do you think that could benefit the economy and the recovery of the economy? Or
I believe that, as I said before, our market is not has developed as other countries. In my opinion, that won't be the priority of the regulator.
yeah,
Since there may be difficulties in relation to, let's say, banks or firm for maybe the chance that some of investment firm maybe they losing their business, they would have to go into bankruptcy. So I think that the eye of the regulator is more focused on
yeah,
protecting the traditional banking and financial system
yeah.
of Italy.
Also the
and
market, no, I guess, with
and
the
the market.
airlines and all of those other,
Yeah, the oil and gas system,
yeah,
the airlines.
which in Italy usually are partially owned by the state, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's partially
So
owned. Some state have stakes in one of the
yeah,
biggest oil and gas companies.
because I know that coming from the Second World War, Italy was very involved within its economies, and when it comes to transport, resources. I know that most of it now has been privatized. However, like a big part still remain in the hands, partially at least, of the government. Like for example, CI, which is the collecting society for authors' right, and what in the UK would be the PPL and PRS, which now have merged. Um, I know that, like in Italy, for example, by law, I believe they were until recently, if it doesn't apply still, the only one, and they were basically, empowered by act of government. So and it comes exactly from the history of the Second World War, and of course, because of Europe now, that's not the situation. As an Italian, you can rely on other collecting societies in Europe, but yeah. So I guess that the impact is going to be very much considerable on the state, also because of this, because it's state owned and not only privately owned.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, and I think also just to think about in general, we saw that we need let's say a better cooperation between European member states
Yeah,
regarding this crisis. So why don't we create committees focused on the development of the fintech sector all across Europe?
yeah,
That could be another chance for Italy, let's say, to develop better its market. And not
yeah.
just, moving randomly, having the buffing, saying that everything is under MiFID, and then
Yeah,
Italy without a clear
everyone like
view.
create its own carve out. I know, but I think like that's a problem within Europe, right? And with the European Union. Not saying that Brexit is a good thing at all, like, but I guess that it highlights one of the major problems, which is states still have a very distinct identity in that you are not calling yourself a European lawyer, you are an Italian lawyer. When I qualify, I'm going to be a lawyer qualified to practice in England and Wales and in Gibraltar. So it's each system is very distinct, and yet at the same time, the European Union tries to remove, at least in part, the ability to compete with one another. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my view. And I think that's what happens. You have then an overarching regulation which covers, or directive or intervention at the European level, which covers the most important aspects. And then states can compete with the carve outs or like with the discretion that they were provided with. So I see what you mean about the European Committee. I'm not sure it would be beneficial from a client perspective, because I think that competition to an extent between states is good for the client, because every state wants to compete in becoming more attractive to the end user.
Yeah, yeah, but
But
it depends. It depends on how you do compete. You compete.
correct, yeah, no, I
If you
understand.
compete with a flat tax rate, 5% of your total turnover, and then you have a taxation system in another country which
Yeah,
force you to pay 30%. That's not a fair competition, in my opinion.
I agree with you.
And that's the same, if we are talking about crypto or blockchain. If you're going to say nothing is financial product under MiFID,
Yeah.
then you can win easily. I mean, but that's,
Yeah, of
in
course.
my opinion, that's not the aim of creating a common regulation in Europe that will put on the same basis all the actors
Yeah.
and let them compete, but with the same base,
I don't know
starting
if
from the
maybe.
same level playing field.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I don't know if maybe ESMA has allowed for a little bit of that to happen, with their guidelines also on like the contract for difference, like exchange and contract for difference guidelines and crypto as well. Then they stopped intervening. But then if you look, for example, at the FCA, they are following a very, very similar approach to what ESMA has adopted. So I guess that maybe that's the way that semi-harmonized system could come about. But yeah, well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, wait
Uh,
until December 2020.
I
Because
know.
starting from January, I believe that there will be a strong competition between the UK financial system and the
Yeah.
European financial system.
We'll see. It's also, I think, of course, coronavirus has a massive impact on that, because I guess every state will require, to focus its priority on rebuilding its market internally before like going and competing. So maybe that could be, I mean, not a positive, because of course it's a terrible situation, but maybe that will change, let's say, what was planned initially. What about like on a more positive note? What's next for you right now? What are you involved in? I guess like everyone else, pretty much you're working from home.
No, yes, I'm working from home like everyone is doing it now.
Yeah,
I mean, from one side, it's also interesting, to have the chance to work alone, to concentrate more
yeah, no,
compared
it
to
gives you
the.
time to think. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, for now, the activity is still ongoing. We're still providing
Yeah.
legal opinion and as usual,
Mhm.
but we have to see in the next months what will happen, because there are signals that the market is crashing a bit,
Yeah, no,
especially
no, to say the least, I can imagine.
Mm.
Yeah. And how is life in Italy right now? Tell us a little bit about that, because it's
Life is, there's sun, but you can't go out, so
how long have you been in quarantine right now, or self-isolation? Sorry.
self-isolation is 1 month. 1 month. We have
And
to
you're in
wait.
Milan right now,
And I'm in
so
Milan, so I believe the other 2 months maybe I will stay
are you
home.
enjoying the concerts from the window, or you can't hear them?
No, I can't
No,
hear
you
them.
can't. You've been kind of.
I have my super stereo here, and I can play the music at concert back in my kitchen.
All right, Damiano, thank you so much for coming on Blockchain Rock. I'd say that we covered more or less everything right now. When this situation is over, hopefully we will be able to host you, in person, as was our plan since a long time. I wish you the best for the time being, and thanks again for coming on Blockchain Rock. It's been a
Thank you
pleasure.
too. It's
Thanks.
my pleasure.
Bye
Bye.
bye.